My family always said I was just a Navy dropout. I kept quiet at my brother's SEAL ceremony, until his general looked right at me and said, "Colonel, you're here?" The whole room went still. My dad's jaw dropped. My name is Samantha Hayes, 35, and I'm standing at the back of my brother's Navy SEAL ceremony in civilian clothes, invisible to my family who thinks I'm a military dropout. The irony? I'm a colonel in Air Force Special Operations. For national security reasons, I've kept my career secret for years. As I scan the crowd, I notice my brother Jack's commanding general looking in my direction, his eyes widening in recognition. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a like if you've ever had to hide your success from people who doubted you. Growing up in San Diego, as the daughter of retired Navy Captain Thomas Hayes, meant military excellence wasn't just encouraged. It was expected. Our home was adorned with naval memorabilia, and dinner conversations revolved around maritime strategy and military history. My father's booming voice would fill our dining room with tales of his deployments, his eyes gleaming with pride as my younger brother Jack absorbed every word. I listened too, equally fascinated, but somehow my enthusiasm was never quite received the same way. Samantha has a sharp mind. My father would tell his Navy buddies who visited, but lacks the discipline for service. This assessment stung particularly because I'd spent my entire childhood dreaming of following his footsteps. I ran before school each morning, studied naval tactics from his bookshelves, and applied to the Naval Academy with perfect grades and test scores. When I was accepted, it was the proudest day of my life. My father actually hugged me, something rare enough to make the moment feel monumental. "Don't waste this opportunity," he said. His voice gruff with what I hoped was emotion. The academy was everything I'd hoped for, challenging and fulfilling. I excelled in strategy courses and physical training, graduating in the top percentile for both. What my family never knew was that during my third year, I was quietly approached by intelligence officers who had noticed my aptitude in several key areas. They offered me a position in a classified program that required immediate transition and absolute secrecy. The program demanded I create a cover story. The officers suggested the simplest explanation, that I'd washed out of the academy. It would be believable enough, many talented candidates didn't make it through, and would draw minimal attention. I agreed. Believing my family would eventually learn the truth when my assignment allowed, I couldn't have been more wrong. "I just don't understand how you could throw it all away," my mother Eleanor said during my first visit home after the dropout. Her disappointment manifested in tight lips and averted eyes. "Your father pulled strings to get you considered." "I didn't ask him to," I replied quietly, the classified nature of my new position sealing my lips from sharing anything meaningful. My father was worse. He didn't rage or lecture, he simply stopped talking about me. When relatives asked about his children, he'd light up discussing Jack's accomplishments at the academy, where he was following the traditional path I'd supposedly abandoned, and then changed the subject when my name arose. Thanksgiving dinners became exercises in endurance. "Jack's been selected for advanced tactical training," my father would announce, slicing the turkey with precision. "Top of his class." "We're so proud," my mother would add, her hand resting on Jack's shoulder while her eyes slid past me. "It's comforting when your children find their purpose." My cousin Melanie, always tactless, once asked directly across the table, "So Sam, are you still working that administrative job at the insurance company?" This was the cover story I'd maintained, a boring corporate position that discouraged further questions. "Yes," I answered, swallowing both the lie and my pride. "Still there." "Good benefits, I guess," she replied with a thin smile that conveyed volumes about her assessment of my life choices. Meanwhile, my actual career was advancing at an extraordinary pace. I couldn't tell them about the night operations in countries officially untouched by American forces. I couldn't mention the intelligence I'd gathered that had saved countless lives or the commendations accumulating in a secure facility rather than on my wall. I couldn't explain the months of silence when I was unreachable because I was operating deep undercover. Each success in my classified world seemed to parallel a disappointment in my family's eyes. When I was promoted to major, my parents were discussing how Jack had been selected for an elite training program. When I received a silver star in a private ceremony, my mother was lamenting to her friends about her daughter, who just didn't apply herself. Jack himself wasn't unkind, he simply followed our parents' lead, growing increasingly distant as our supposed life paths diverged. Occasionally he'd call with news of his accomplishments, always ending with an awkward, "So, how's the office job?" I'd murmur congratulations and offer vague updates about my fictional corporate life, hating every second of the deception. Years passed this way, with the divide growing wider. I developed a thick skin about my family's perception, focusing instead on my missions and the difference I was making. But deep down the pain of being the family disappointment never fully subsided. Every achievement in my secret life was shadowed by the knowledge that the people who should be proudest didn't even know. My transition from Naval Academy student to Air Force Special Operations was abrupt and intense. While my family believed I was licking my wounds and settling for civilian mediocrity, I was actually undergoing some of the most rigorous training the military offers. The program that recruited me specialized in intelligence gathering and analysis with direct tactical applications, a rare combination that suited my particular skills. The training facility was located in an unmarked compound in Virginia, where days began at 4 a.m. and often ended after midnight. Physical conditioning was merely the foundation. The real work involved learning to process and analyze intelligence in real-time crisis situations, often while experiencing extreme physical stress or sleep deprivation. "Hayes, your mind works differently," my instructor, Major Lawrence, noted after I solved a particularly complex intelligence simulation. "You see patterns where others see chaos." This aptitude accelerated my progress through the program. While most trainees required 18 months to complete the course, I finished in 11. My first assignment came immediately after a low-profile intelligence gathering operation in Eastern Europe, where Russian influence was creating concerning ripple effects. Colonel Diana Patterson became my mentor during this period. A pioneering woman in special operations, she recognized something in me that reminded her of herself. "The system isn't built for us," she told me frankly during a debriefing. "But that's precisely why we succeed in it. We approach problems from angles others don't consider." Under her guidance, I learned to navigate not just the operational challenges, but also the unique difficulties of being a woman in this elite space. She taught me to use others' underestimation as an advantage, to speak with quiet authority rather than volume, and to build networks of trust that transcended the usual military hierarchies. By my 4th year, I had been promoted twice and led my own intelligence team in operations spanning 3 continents. My specialty became extracting critical information in environments where traditional intelligence assets couldn't operate. One particular mission in Syria resulted in intelligence that prevented a major terrorist attack on European soil. The classified commendation cited my exceptional judgment under extreme pressure and innovative tactical approach. Yet each time I received recognition within my classified world, the contrast with my family life became more painful. I attended award ceremonies alone, watching other officers embrace their proud families. I celebrated promotions with colleagues who knew only pieces of my story, never the full picture. And I continued to maintain my cover as an unremarkable corporate drone during increasingly infrequent family visits. "Congratulations on your promotion to team lead in customer service," my mother said during one phone call, clearly making an effort to show interest in what she believed was my career. I had just been promoted to lieutenant colonel after a successful counterterrorism operation in Somalia. "Thanks, Mom," I replied, hating the deception. "It's just a small step up." The operational security requirements of my position meant maintaining absolute secrecy. Even as I rose to command larger teams and more sensitive missions, my cover story remained in place. Only a handful of high-ranking officers knew my complete service record, while most who worked with me knew only the portions relevant to our joint operations. By the time I reached the rank of colonel at age 34, an accomplishment that placed me among the youngest to achieve this rank, I had led operations in over a dozen countries and saved countless lives through intelligence work. My specialty in counterterrorism had expanded to include disrupting human trafficking networks and preventing hostile cyber operations against critical infrastructure. What made my rapid rise even more remarkable was achieving it while facing the additional challenges women in special operations encounter. I navigated skepticism from some traditional military circles, adapted to equipment and tactical approaches designed for male physiology, and developed leadership styles that commanded respect in environments where female leaders were still relatively rare. Through it all, I carried the strange burden of my family's disappointment. Each time I returned from a classified deployment to attend a holiday gathering or family event, I stepped back into the role of Sam the underachiever. I became adept at deflecting questions about my work with vague corporate jargon and redirecting conversations to Jack's increasingly impressive naval career. The weight of these dual identities grew heavier with each passing year. There were moments when the deception felt unbearable, like when my father made a passing comment about people who couldn't cut it in real service, or when distant relatives asked patronizing questions about when I might find direction in my life. But my commitment to national security and the missions I led always silenced the impulse to reveal the truth. The work was too important, the stakes too high. If maintaining my family's disappointment was the price for operational security, I would continue to pay it, regardless of the personal cost. Last Thanksgiving marked a particular low point in my relationship with my family. I just returned from coordinating a joint intelligence operation with NATO forces, 36 sleepless hours of tension that ultimately prevented a significant security breach. Instead of recovery time, I went straight to my parents' house, exchanging tactical gear for civilian clothes and the hypervigilance of command for the different tension of family dinner. My father stood at the head of the table, crystal glass raised in a toast. To Jack, he announced, his voice carrying the captain's authority that never quite left him, whose selection for the elite SEAL training program continues our family's tradition of excellence in service. Everyone raised their glasses. My mother beamed with pride, her eyes glistening. "We couldn't be prouder," she added. I joined the toast sincerely. Jack's accomplishment was significant, and despite our strained relationship, I respected his dedication. But as glasses clinked and congratulations flowed, my mother leaned toward her sister and whispered just loudly enough for me to hear. "At least one of our children is making us proud." The comments sliced through me despite years of developing thick skin. I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to help with dessert, but really to compose myself. My cousin Melanie followed, cornering me by the refrigerator. "So, still pushing papers at that insurance company?" she asked, sipping her wine with an air of superiority. Melanie had recently been promoted at her law firm, and never missed an opportunity to highlight the contrast in our careers. "Something like that," I replied, focusing on arranging pie slices rather than meeting her gaze. "You know, my firm has an opening in our administrative department," she offered with faux generosity. "Probably pays better than what you're making," I could put in a word. I thanked her politely while imagining how she might react if she knew I'd just briefed the Joint Chiefs of Staff the previous week. The dinner conversation shifted to a recent military operation that had made national news, an operation I had actually helped coordinate from the intelligence side. I sat silently as my father and uncle analyzed what little information had been released to the public, both confidently incorrect about how the mission had unfolded. If they'd approached from the eastern perimeter instead, my father declared with authority, they could have avoided that initial resistance. I took a long sip of water knowing the eastern perimeter had been deliberately avoided due to intelligence I'd personally verified about hidden surveillance systems. The urge to correct him burned in my throat, but I swallowed it with my water. After dinner, Jack announced his engagement to his girlfriend Allison, a naval medical officer he'd met during his training. The family erupted in celebration, champagne appeared, toasts multiplied, and my mother immediately began discussing wedding plans. In the midst of this joyful chaos, my secure phone vibrated with the pattern that indicated highest priority. I slipped away to the guest bedroom to check the message, immediate deployment orders. A situation had developed that required my specific expertise, with extraction scheduled in 3 hours. I returned to the celebration, pulling Jack aside to offer genuine congratulations, and explained that a work emergency required me to leave immediately. His face fell in disappointment tinged with familiar judgment. "Seriously, Sam? It's my engagement celebration. What kind of insurance emergency happens on Thanksgiving night?" "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it completely but unable to explain further. "I wouldn't leave if it wasn't absolutely necessary." My parents reacted with the resigned disappointment I'd grown accustomed to. "Of course Samantha has to leave," my mother said to the relatives, not bothering to lower her voice. Her priorities have always been different. I caught my father's head shake as I gathered my coat, the subtle gesture of disapproval that had followed me since childhood. As I drove away, the family continued celebrating without me while I prepared mentally for the classified operation ahead. The mission kept me deployed through Christmas and into the new year. When I finally returned, I learned that my absence had become a focal point of family discussion. Jack's engagement party had been held without me, and my failure to attend had been interpreted as further evidence of my disregard for family. "Your brother was hurt," my mother informed me during a tense phone call. "After everything he's accomplished, the least you could do is show up for his important moments." What she couldn't know was that during his engagement party, I had been leading a critical intelligence operation that resulted in the rescue of kidnapped aid workers. The mission earned me another commendation, one that would remain in a classified file, rather than on my mantle. The growing divide between my professional success and personal failure created an increasingly unbearable tension. Each family interaction became more strained, each deception more painful. As Jack's seal ceremony approached, I found myself at a breaking point. Torn between my duty to national security and my crumbling relationship with my family. The day of Jack's seal ceremony dawned clear and bright, perfect Southern California weather that seemed to mock my inner turmoil. I deliberated for weeks about whether to attend, knowing my presence would be scrutinized by a family increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as my indifference to Jack's achievements. My decision to go wasn't simple. I requested a rare day of leave from my duties, arranged secure transport, and carefully selected civilian clothes that would allow me to blend in while still maintaining appropriate military bearing, a habit too ingrained to break even in this context. The Naval Special Warfare Command facility gleamed in the morning sun as I approached. I instinctively cataloged security positions and protocols, with my trained eyes noticing details most civilians would miss. This awareness reminded me how far I was from the person my family believed me to be. I arrived deliberately late, slipping into the back row as families claimed seats near the front. My parents occupied prominent positions in the family section. My father wearing his dress uniform with the pride of a naval captain whose son was following his distinguished path. My mother sat beside him, elegant in a navy blue dress, her posture reflecting the military precision she'd absorbed through decades of marriage to my father. The ceremony proceeded with the characteristic discipline and tradition of naval special warfare. Each element, from the presentation of colors to the precise movements of the honor guard, followed protocols I knew intimately from my own classified ceremonies. The difference was that today's event was public, celebrated openly with proud families and commemorative programs, unlike the clandestine recognition of my own achievements. As the ceremony progressed, I found myself analyzing the security perimeter out of professional habit, while simultaneously absorbing the significance of Jack's accomplishment. Becoming a SEAL represented years of grueling training and exceptional dedication, a fact I appreciated perhaps more fully than anyone else in my family could. Midway through the ceremony, I noticed a familiar face on the platform, Rear Admiral Wilson, who had commanded joint operations where my intelligence team had provided critical support. He was scheduled to deliver remarks as part of the leadership cadre. Seeing him triggered an immediate internal alert. Admiral Wilson was one of the few high-ranking officers who knew my complete service record and true rank. I shifted slightly in my seat, angling myself to become less visible from the stage. The movement was subtle, the kind of adjustment intelligence officers make instinctively to avoid recognition when necessary. For a moment, I believed I had successfully minimized my presence. Then came Jack's moment of recognition. He stood tall as his accomplishments were read, his face composed in the disciplined expression of a warrior receiving honors. Despite our complicated relationship, pride swelled in my chest. Whatever else had transpired between us, my brother had earned this moment through genuine merit and determination. His applause followed Jack's recognition. I allowed myself to relax marginally, a mistake in retrospect. My slight movement caught Admiral Wilson's eye during his scan of the audience. I watched his expression change as recognition dawned, first confusion, then certainty, then an unmistakable reaction to finding a highly decorated Air Force Special Operations colonel sitting anonymously in civilian clothes at a Navy SEAL ceremony. Our eyes locked momentarily. In that brief exchange, I conveyed a silent request for discretion that military personnel of our rank and experience understand implicitly. The Admiral gave an almost imperceptible nod, and I believed the moment had passed without incident. The ceremony continued with the remaining recognitions and formal remarks. I began calculating my exit strategy, planning to congratulate Jack briefly before departing to avoid extended family interaction. But as the formal portion concluded, and families began moving toward their graduating seals, I noticed Admiral Wilson conversing with another officer while gesturing subtly in my direction. My internal alarm sharpened. The second officer, Commander Brooks, had also worked with my team during a joint counterterrorism operation the previous year. Now both men were looking in my direction with the particular expression of military leadership preparing to acknowledge a fellow officer. I began moving toward the exit, hoping to evade the approaching confrontation, but the crowd's movement blocked my path. As families surged forward to congratulate their graduates, I found myself inadvertently pushed toward the area where Jack stood with my parents, rather than toward the exit I'd been targeting. In that moment of navigational confusion, Admiral Wilson reached me, his commanding presence parting the crowd around us. I straightened instinctively, muscle memory responding to the presence of a superior officer despite my civilian clothes. What happened next would permanently alter my family's perception, and change the course of our relationships forever. Colonel Hayes, Admiral Wilson's voice carried clearly above the post-ceremony chatter. I didn't expect to see you here today. The title echoed in the space around us, turning heads. My parents, standing just feet away beside Jack, froze in confusion. Admiral Wilson, I responded, automatically assuming the formal posture ingrained through years of military service. It's good to see you, sir. Last time was that joint operation in the Gulf, wasn't it? He continued, either unaware of or unconcerned about my family's proximity. Your intelligence was impeccable as always. Saved a lot of lives. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Jack's expression transformed from celebration to bewilderment. My father stood rigid, his brow furrowed in deepening confusion. Colonel? My father finally spoke, the words sounding foreign on his tongue when directed at me. There must be some mistake. Admiral Wilson turned, noticing my family for the first time. Recognition flashed across his face as he took in my father's decorated Navy uniform. Captain Hayes. He acknowledged with respect, before turning back to me with raised eyebrows. They don't know. Before I could respond, Commander Brooks approached, extending his hand. Colonel Hayes, your team's work on the Antalya operation was remarkable. We've implemented your extraction protocols across 3 divisions now. The reality of my position was materializing around us like a photograph developing in solution, becoming clearer with each passing second. My carefully maintained cover, the story of professional mediocrity I'd cultivated for years, was dissolving in real time. Samantha? My mother's voice trembled with confusion. What are they talking about? Admiral Wilson assessed the situation with the quick comprehension of a seasoned commander. Captain Hayes, Mrs. Hayes, he addressed my parents directly. Your daughter is one of our most valuable assets in special operations. Her work in intelligence and counterterrorism has been extraordinary. That's not possible, my father stated flatly. Samantha left the Naval Academy. She works in insurance. Air Force, not Navy, Admiral Wilson corrected. And at a rank that reflects exceptional service. The insurance work would be her cover story, fairly standard in her division. Jack stepped forward, his new SEAL trident gleaming on his uniform. Sam. Is this true? The moment of decision had arrived without warning or preparation. Years of secrecy pressed against the sudden exposure, creating a disorienting pressure. But, as I looked at my family's confused faces, I recognized that continuing the deception was no longer an option. Yes, I confirmed simply. It's true. My father's expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and the beginning glimmers of reassessment. You're actually a colonel? In the Air Force, Special Operations Command, Intelligence Division 1 specified, the words feeling strange after years of careful avoidance. I was recruited from the academy directly into a classified program. The Dropout story was my cover. Other officers who recognized me had begun to drift over, creating an impromptu gathering that made the revelation increasingly public. A major from Joint Special Operations nodded respectfully, in my direction. Colonel Hayes's analysis changed our entire approach in the Mogadishu intervention. My mother looked physically unsteady. All this time, when we thought, I couldn't tell you, I said quietly. Most of my work is classified at the highest levels. The cover story was a requirement, not a choice. Jack's expression had transformed completely, shifting from confusion to a growing understanding that only another military professional could fully grasp. That's why you missed my engagement party. Coordinating an extraction of exposed assets in Eastern Europe, I confirmed. It couldn't wait. And I couldn't explain. My father, ever the Navy man, had regained his composure, and was processing the information with military precision. What's your security clearance level? Higher than I can specify in this setting, I answered, the response itself confirming more than the words contained. Around us, the crowd continued to celebrate, largely oblivious to the family drama unfolding in our small circle. But within that circle, years of misperception were crumbling under the weight of revealed truth. Admiral Wilson, sensing the personal nature of the moment, prepared to withdraw. Captain Hayes, you should be proud. Your daughter's service record is exceptional. The details are classified, but the value is beyond question. He turned to me with a respectful nod. Colonel, I'll see you at next month's Joint Operations briefing. As he departed, the protective barrier between my two worlds, the accomplished military officer and the family disappointment, had been irrevocably breached. Standing before my family in civilian clothes, but now recognized as Colonel Hayes, I felt exposed in a way that countless high-risk operations had never made me feel. Why would you let us believe you'd failed? My mother asked, hurt evident in her voice. It wasn't about what you believed, I explained carefully. It was about operational security. The fewer people who knew, the safer the operations and the people involved. My father, processing this revelation with decades of military experience, was beginning to understand the magnitude of what had been hidden. To reach colonel at your age, in special operations, Jack, with his own military training, was connecting dots fastest. Those unexplained absences. The vague explanations. That time you showed up at Christmas with what looked like shrapnel wounds you claimed were from a car accident. Not a car accident, I confirmed quietly. As reality settled around us, I watched my family recalibrating years of perceptions and judgments. The disappointment they had carried and the disappointment I had endured was transforming into something else entirely. Something yet undefined but irrevocably changed. We have a lot to talk about, my father said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a man discovering he had been wrong about a fundamental truth. Yes, I agreed. We do. The family dinner following Jack's ceremony took place at an upscale restaurant near the base, a celebration planned long before the day's revelations. What should have been exclusively focused on Jack's achievement had now become something else entirely, the first honest family gathering of my adult life. We sat at a private table in the corner, security conscious even now. My father ordered wine with uncharacteristic generosity. Perhaps recognizing that this conversation required social lubrication, silence hung heavily as menus were studied with unusual intensity, everyone avoiding the elephant in the room until the waiter departed with our orders. So, my father began, setting his water glass down with precision. A colonel. It wasn't a question, but I nodded confirmation. That's remarkably fast advancement, he continued, the career military officer in him automatically calculating the timeline. Especially for someone in. He lowered his voice. Special operations. It was a unique path, I acknowledged. The program I was recruited into accelerates promotion timelines based on field performance rather than standard timing grade requirements. My mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. All those times we thought you were being flaky or irresponsible, disappearing from family events, being unreachable for days, I was deployed, I finished for her. Often in locations I can't name, doing things I still can't discuss. Jack leaned forward, professional curiosity mixing with brotherly reassessment. That scar on your shoulder from 2 Christmases ago? Kabul, I said simply. Extraction operation went sideways. My father's face tightened. The career naval officer understood immediately what went sideways typically meant. And we were giving you grief about missing family photos, my mother whispered, horror dawning in her expression. The conversation paused as our salads arrived. When the waiter departed again, my father asked the question that clearly bothered him most. Why the Air Force? You were at the Naval Academy. I had to smile slightly. Of course, that would be his first substantive question. The program that recruited me operated jointly, but was administratively housed under Air Force Special Operations. The work suited my particular skills, regardless of branch. Which are, he pressed, intelligence analysis under high-pressure conditions, pattern recognition in asymmetric environments, asset development, and management. Some other specialties I can't detail. Jack whistled softly. That's the heavy stuff, Sam. My mother was struggling to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with this new reality. But why couldn't you tell us anything? We're your family. Operational security, I explained gently. The nature of my work means that knowledge of my real position could potentially endanger operations or expose networks. The cover story was created and maintained by the program, not by my choice. For 12 years my father challenged, the hurt beneath his question evident despite his military bearing. Not one word of truth. That's the job, Dad, I said simply. You of all people should understand that some positions require complete compartmentalization. He fell silent. Military discipline acknowledging what the father in him wanted to deny. The main course arrived, providing another brief reprieve from the intensity of the conversation. As we began eating, Jack broke the tension with a short laugh. So, all those times I was bragging about my promotions and assignments. You were talking to someone who was briefing Joint Chiefs, I finished with a small smile. God, I must have sounded like such an idiot, he groaned. You didn't, I assured him. Your accomplishments are real and significant. Different operational areas, different challenges. My mother set down her fork, her food barely touched. I keep thinking about all the things we said to you over the years, the disappointment we expressed, the judgments. You didn't know, I said. You couldn't have. But we should have trusted you, she insisted, tears gathering. We should have seen that there was more happening than what appeared on the surface. Instead, we just wrote you off. The raw truth of her statement hung in the air. They had written me off, creating a narrative of the disappointing daughter that fit the limited information they had. My father, always less comfortable with emotional displays, redirected slightly. Your upcoming promotion. Admiral Wilson mentioned a briefing next month. Are you being considered for Brigadier General? I confirmed quietly. It's not finalized yet. His eyebrows rose sharply. At your age? That would be unusual, I acknowledged. The recommendation is based on the Tavros operation results. That's all I can say about it. My mother wiped her eyes. And we wouldn't have known about this either if today hadn't happened. I hesitated, then admitted the truth. Probably not the details now. You might have eventually learned I was military, but specifics about rank and position would have remained classified. The meal continued with questions I could answer, intermingled with ones I couldn't. The boundaries of classified information remained even in this new openness, creating an imperfect, but vastly improved, communication. For the first time, my family was seeing the outline of my real life, even if many details remained in shadow. After dinner, my parents invited me back to their home. A gesture that felt significant after years of emotional distance. In their living room, my mother disappeared briefly before returning with a dusty box. I kept these, she said, setting it between us, even though I didn't understand why you'd want them. Inside were mementos from my academy days, my midshipman's cap, academic awards, photographs, items that would have made no sense to preserve for someone who had supposedly failed out. Yet she had kept them anyway. Some part of me never believed the story, she admitted quietly. It didn't fit the daughter I raised, but I couldn't imagine an alternative explanation. My father, after several drinks and hours of processing, had grown unusually reflective. "I was hardest on you," he acknowledged, military directness applied now to personal failing. "When we thought you'd washed out, I took it personally. Made it about my legacy rather than your path." I understood why. I told him honestly. And maintaining the cover story was part of my duty, even when it was difficult. "Duty," he repeated, the concept resonating deeply with his naval corps, "at the expense of being known by your own family." Jack, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke again. "But things can be different now, right? I mean, we know the basic truth, even if details stay classified." It was the question I'd been considering throughout the evening. "Some things can change," I agreed cautiously. "You know my actual profession now, my general position. But most of my work will remain classified. There will still be unexplained absences, questions I can't answer. But we'll understand what they mean now," my mother said. As the evening drew to a close, my father did something unprecedented in our relationship. He stood, straightened as if addressing a fellow officer, and extended his hand formally. "Colonel Hayes," he said, using my rank for the first time, "I believe I owe you an apology in my respect." I took his hand, years of military bearing preventing the emotion in my throat from showing on my face. "Thank you, Captain." It was an imperfect beginning to a new chapter. One where the truth, even partially revealed, created possibility for healing what deception had damaged. As I left my parents' home that night, I carried both the continued weight of necessary secrets, and the newfound lightness of being partially known by those who mattered most. 6 months after Jack's seal ceremony, I found myself approaching my parents' home for another family gathering, this time, a 4th of July barbecue that had been a Hayes family tradition for decades. The familiar nervousness that had accompanied these visits for years had transformed into something different, a cautious optimism about family relationships rebuilding on more honest ground. As I walked up the driveway carrying a dish I'd actually prepared myself, rather than the usual hastily purchased store contribution, I noticed several of my father's old Navy colleagues gathered around the grill. In previous years, I had avoided these military-heavy gatherings whenever possible, finding the deception particularly difficult among those who spoke my professional language. Today was different. My father spotted me and straightened slightly, not quite the attention stance of military protocol, but a new recognition that carried its own significance. "Sam's here," he called, using my familiar name, but with a new tone. As I approached, he did something unprecedented. He turned to his friends and said, "Gentlemen, my daughter, Colonel Hayes, Air Force Special Operations." The introduction, simple but accurate, represented a seismic shift. The retired officers nodded with the respect of men who understood precisely what the rank and division signified, particularly for someone my age. No details were necessary. The basic facts communicated volumes to those who spoke the language of military service. My mother emerged from the house, her greeting warmer than I could remember in years. As she hugged me, she whispered, "I put together a small display. Nothing classified, I promise." Curious, I followed her inside to the study, my father's domain traditionally filled with his naval memorabilia. In one corner, she had created a discreet but meaningful arrangement. My academy graduation photo, the few unclassified commendations I'd been able to share, and a recent formal photograph in uniform following my promotion to brigadier general. "Is this okay?" she asked, uncertainty in her voice. "I wanted to honor your service too, but I wasn't sure about security concerns." I examined the display carefully. "It's perfect," I assured her. "Nothing here reveals operational details." Her relief was evident. "Good. Your father checks it every day, you know." I think he's still wrapping his mind around everything. Returning to the backyard, I found Jack manning the grill alongside our father. My brother's transformation had been perhaps the most straightforward, one military professional recognizing another, with the shared understanding that comes from parallel experiences despite different branches and specializations. Experiences despite different branches and specializations. "General," he greeted me with a grin and a deliberately informal salute. "Burger or hot dog?" "Both," I replied, falling easily into the sibling banter that had been absent for too long. I just finished 3 weeks of MREs. I'm making up for lost time. He nodded, understanding immediately what 3 weeks likely signified without asking questions he knew I couldn't answer. This new shorthand between us, acknowledging the boundaries of classified work without resentment, had become one of the unexpected gifts of the truth. The afternoon progressed with a lightness I hadn't experienced at family gatherings in over a decade. Though many topics remained off-limits, my recent deployment locations, the nature of current operations, the specifics of upcoming assignments, the fundamental truth of who I was, and what I did now formed the foundation of our interactions. My father, always more comfortable with actions than words, found ways to express his changed perspective. He introduced me to his colleagues with unmistakable pride. He referenced my operational insight when discussions turned to current military affairs. And most tellingly, he deferred to my expertise in areas where Air Force operations intersected with naval concerns. A professional respect that meant more than any verbal apology. As evening approached and we gathered for the traditional Hayes family photo, I stood beside Jack, both of us now recognized for our service rather than compared by it. My mother arranged us with the precision a longtime military spouse. My children, she said to a neighbor who was taking the photograph, both serving their country, just in different ways. The simple statement acknowledged the parallel value of our different paths, a recognition that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Later, as fireworks illuminated the sky, my father joined me at the edge of the yard where I'd stepped away briefly to check a secure message. "All good?" he asked, the question encompassing more than the immediate communication. "Yes," I confirmed, returning the phone to my pocket. "Nothing urgent," he nodded, gazing upward at the patriotic display rather than at me. A military man's approach to emotional conversation. "I've been thinking about what it cost you," he said finally, carrying that cover story all these years. "Bearing our disappointment when you were actually doing my job," I finished when he trailed off. "That's all it was, Dad. The job I was assigned, with the parameters required. But the personal cost," he insisted, still watching the fireworks. "Missing the recognition you deserved, even from your family." I considered this, formulating my response with the same care I applied to operational assessments. There's something freeing about being evaluated solely on your work without external expectations or family legacy influencing perceptions, I offered. In some ways, starting with a blank slate, let me define my own path. He absorbed this perspective thoughtfully. "Still, I regret the judgments we made with incomplete information." "That's the nature of intelligence work," I replied with a small smile. "Everyone operates with incomplete information. The difference is whether you recognize its incompleteness." This observation, applying professional principles to personal relationships, seemed to resonate with him, a fair assessment he acknowledged, military precision in his nod. As we rejoined the family gathering, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 6 months. The revelation at Jack's ceremony had not instantly repaired years of misunderstanding, but it had created space for something new to grow. The family that had once seen me as their greatest disappointment was now navigating a recalibrated relationship based on partial truth. The maximum disclosure my position allowed. 2 weeks later, I stood at attention during my promotion ceremony, the stars of a brigadier general being affixed to my uniform. Unlike previous promotions celebrated only among cleared colleagues, this one included 3 seats in the family section, occupied by my parents and brother. The technical details of my accomplishments remained classified in the official citation, cloaked in the deliberately vague language of special operations. But the pride in my family's eyes needed no detailed explanation. They understood enough now, not everything, but enough. As the ceremony concluded and I joined my family, my mother embraced me with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were exceptional," she whispered. "I just didn't know how." My father, ever the naval captain, extended his hand for a formal shake before professional composure gave way to parental pride, and he pulled me into a brief, tight hug. "Well done, General Hayes," he said gruffly. "Well done." The journey from family disappointment to recognized professional had been complicated by necessary secrets and security requirements that would never fully disappear. But standing with my family, accepting congratulations for an achievement they could finally acknowledge, I found peace in being partially known, an imperfect but meaningful visibility after years in the shadows. For anyone who has been misjudged or underestimated, there's a powerful lesson in this experience. Sometimes the truth emerges in unexpected ways, and sometimes the perceptions others hold aren't reflections of reality, but simply products of limited information. The worth you create through your work and choices remains valid even when unrecognized, and authenticity, even when necessarily incomplete, creates possibilities for connection that deception cannot.